So this is Eduardo from Venice, from the University of Venice, and I'm pleased to welcome all of you to this session, which explores method. Before we move on with the session itself, I just wanted to say thank you to AlterSEA for having us, that is the University of Venice, here. As you may know, the University of Venice Ca' Foscari has a fairly long history of Asian studies. And just 3 years ago, we opened a program on Southeast Asian studies for bachelor students, which is the first in Italy. So we're very pleased to be here and to be able to represent this emerging Center for Southeast Asian Studies. Now, this session, as I said, will be on method. As you know, presenters will speak for something like 45 to 60 minutes altogether. And presentations will be followed by a Q&A session, which will last between 30 and 45 minutes. And I must, as I moderate this session, I would like to please ask everyone who does not present while they're not presenting to please keep your microphones off. And for what concerns the Q&A session, please just drop your questions in the chat box, and these will be passed on to the speakers. So, also ensure that you put down the names of the speakers you want your questions to be asked to. And now, to move on with the session, I will pass the microphone on to Serina Abdul Rahman, who is an Associate Fellow of ISEAS-Yusof Ishak of Singapore. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, or good morning or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. For us here in Malaysia, I'm tuning in from Johor Bahru at the south of Malaysia. It is the afternoon, 3:30 just about. Thank you for having me in this conference again. And it's nice to see all of you here. Let's hope we can do this smoothly today. So this session will be on methods, and specifically articulating different goals and approaches. As Eduardo has mentioned, we only have until about an hour 15 to do this. So every speaker should have about 12 minutes or thereabouts, and then I may have to intervene if you're going on for a bit longer, so that we have time for Q&A, because it is in Q&A that we are able to discuss a lot more. So do stick to your timing, and I might have to appear and rudely say, I'm sorry, if we go above time. Right, so just to explain a little bit about this session, if you're just coming in, I forgot to introduce myself. I am actually from NUS now, and so I'm part-time with ISEAS-Yusof Ishak Institute. I've swapped jobs, so I have to give credit to my current institution. I'm with the Southeast Asian Studies Department. It's nice to know you have one also in Venice, Eduardo. Okay, so articulating different goals and approaches. Today we have 5 speakers from a good number of universities across Southeast Asia and beyond. And we are talking about largely participant observation, although I think some of the other speakers may have other methodologies that we will be discussing. So participant observation in particular has always been a bit of an oxymoron, a contradiction, especially if you are studying political movements. How do you possibly participate and observe? And provide a critical, objective analysis, as is our job as researchers, right? So what kind of tensions will emerge in this research process, in the purpose and the methods of knowledge production? How do you give shape to this collaboration involving both activists and researchers when there is collective action? So today the presenters will share their experiences of how they combine their objectives, their synergies, and the reciprocal enrichment in their cross-sectoral research. So far, we've seen this conference, thank you AlterSEA, has been really grounded in lots to learn. So today we'll add to that pile of information, and our speakers will address the potential negotiations led by researchers in order to maintain a critical distance towards movements, official narratives, although they are involved in it, to address uncomfortable questions and to resolve questions of research findings, ownership, So this is where we give credit where credit is due, where we figure out how to be objective even as we are involved in the process, and how do we then write and produce information on it. Sorry, we'll go straight to the speakers. Do introduce yourselves. Tammy has asked, Tammy Cole Robinson, who's supposed to go first, has asked if they can go last. So if Valerie, are you there? Valerie Cruz Claudia?
Good afternoon to all. Mabuhay from the Philippines. I hope that I can be heard loudly and clearly.
Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you.
So
thank you. Okay. Thank you, Serina. I'm a history instructor from the history department of Ateneo de Manila University, and I am currently pursuing also a PhD in history from the University of the Philippines. That's all. Thank you very much and good afternoon.
Thank you, Valerie. Would you be able to go first, was the question.
Oh, sure. I can go first. Okay.
So sorry about that, but last minute there was a request.
Okay. All right. Okay.
You can share screen. Are you able to share screen?
Oh, yes, I'm able to. Oh, I can present now. Okay. Thank you, Serina. I can start presenting.
So sorry for the lack of warning. I just got this message.
No problem. My pleasure.
Okay. So you have about 12 minutes. Thanks so much, Valerie.
Okay. So, Ms. Serina, can I ask if you can see my screen?
It's all good.
Okay. All right. So, good afternoon once again. So my topic for this afternoon from the Philippines is constitutional rights, crimes, and cruelty, the Filipino woman and selected laws and jurisprudence from the Third Republic to the present. So when I speak of the Third Republic, this is the time when the Philippines obtained its independence after the Second World War. Moving forward, this is the abstract that I submitted to AlterSEA. Basically, my research aims to show how Philippine laws and jurisprudence can be used as a primary source in a historical research. While there have been a lot of studies conducted about women's history in the Philippines, I intended to rely on legal sources to see how women prevailed in the society in a particular time. This has also something to do with my legal background. I happen to have a law degree, so using the multidisciplinary approach, I wanted to incorporate legal history and history in general for that matter. So my main research question is, how is the Filipino woman viewed in the eyes of law and jurisprudence from the Third Republic to the present? So when I speak of law, I refer to the Philippine Constitution. The Philippines had a long history of democracy, so we've had several constitutions, but primarily I'll be referring here to the 1935 Constitution, the Constitution that was enacted when we were under American occupation, that also gave the way for the creation of the Philippine Commonwealth in 1935, and also the 1987 Constitution, which is the Constitution after the EDSA People Power Revolution. I will be also dealing with the Civil Code of the Philippines, formerly called the Código Civil under the Spanish occupation, the Revised Penal Code, formerly called the Código Penal, again under the Spanish occupation, selected special laws, and selected jurisprudence. So this will be the source. These are the sources that I use primarily for my research. Of course, supported by secondary sources, by experts and scholars who provided explanation on these primary sources. So this is the research methodology that I applied, qualitative approach. There were no mathematical or statistical data that was necessary to arrive at my conclusion. I applied narrative and analysis, primary and secondary sources, and multidisciplinary approach. By multidisciplinary approach, I applied two fields in specific. You have history of law and jurisprudence, which is legal history, and women's history, of course, within the context of Philippine history. So the intersection here was the focal point of discussion for my research paper. Moving forward, scope and limitation. I've already mentioned earlier that I will be referencing the 1935 and 1987 Constitution. Another factor would be because it was clear in this new Constitution that the state of the Philippines was a republican and a democratic one. Under the 1973 Constitution, there was an attempt to transition to a parliamentary system. So it was not congruent with these two constitutions. The 1950 Civil Code and the Family Code of the Philippines, so the Código Civil would later change into the Civil Code of the Philippines. And after we were granted independence, it will become the 1950 Civil Code. And after EDSA People Power Revolution, it will again be amended and it will be called Family Code of the Philippines. And then the Revised Penal Code of the Philippines, selected jurisprudence, and selected special laws. From these sources, I intend to analyze how women were portrayed. Also a reflection of how women were viewed in the society. So the limitation of the paper would be the Sharia law or the Islamic law. In the Philippines, we have a special law for our Muslim brothers, and different customs are applied. So it is a limitation of my paper. Moving forward, I intend to show that women in the early Philippine history and exercise a great deal of freedom and prestige in the society, as in the case of the Babaylanes and the Catalonan, and as well as in the Binukot. In the early Philippine society, Babaylanes and Catalonan are one of the pillars of the society, along with the Datu and also the Pandal. And then you also have the Binukot, whereby we exercise a different concept of dowry, where it is the family of the man, or it is the man who would pay dowry to the family of the woman. So you can see here that women in the early Philippine society were treated with great respect, or you can say that there is egalitarian status between men and women. There will, of course, be changes upon the Spanish occupation, because the image of Maria Clara, the demure image of the Filipina woman, would prevail, but only within the elite women, those who would be sent to Catholic or religious institutions and to be instructed by religious nuns and friars. Such was not the case among the working women, because certain women enjoyed autonomy. One of the most lucrative profession was to become a cigarreras, because it was one of the biggest industries under the Spanish occupation. And the cigarreras would have their wage and number of hours where they would have to go to their work. And in that case, in fact, Filipino women already in the 19th century conducted their first strike, because there was a document discovered by Dr. Maria Luisa Camagay called the Alborotos de Cigarreras, whereby the women working for the cigarette factories conducted a strike. But then the male counterparts viewed it only as a kind of stalking, or did not take it seriously. But if you will look closely at the document, it was actually a strike, because the women wanted to have better conditions in terms of employment. Until the early American occupation, women will continue to play key roles in the society, such as in the case of the Cruz Roja or the Red Cross, where women who look after the wounded Filipino soldiers, cared for the sick, cooked their food, and sewed their uniforms. There were also women who fought in frontline during the Philippine-American War. And then, of course, there were also the pensionadas, meaning the first set of Filipina scholars. During the American occupation, education was open to both men and women. And Filipinas grabbed that opportunity. Thus, we had our first educators, first lawyers, and first doctors. But of course, the key goal perhaps of the women during the American occupation would be the suffrage movement. influenced greatly also by the suffrage movement in the United States. Initially, the Filipino women only wanted to participate in social and civic activities, but later on, they also realized that it was the right time for them to also participate in the political arena. So it would be in the Philippine Commonwealth where women will be granted, not really granted because the women will vote for that via a plebiscite, but this suffrage bill was very important because that opened the door for women to have participation in the political arena and to become authors of their own laws, not just objects of the laws. In the Japanese occupation, of course, there were also women who joined the resistance movement against the Japanese, and there were Filipino sharpshooters and spies. But as you can see here, women as subjects of laws and not authors of their own laws, Código Civil and Código Penal. But the women's suffrage bill changed the destiny of the Filipino woman. In the Third Republic, after we were finally an independent country, we were no longer under any colonizers. Filipino woman and the Constitution, as you can see here, in the 1935 Constitution, the triumph here would be the suffrage bill. And in the 1987 Constitution, after EDSA People Power Revolution, because the head of the Constitutional Commission was a woman justice, Justice Cecilia Muñoz Palma, it was incorporated that women will now be part of the nation building of the Philippines. And because of that, later special laws, because the Constitution is the father of all laws, special laws concerning women can now be passed to advance their causes. However, there will still be pockets of discrimination behind, because there will still be cases of crimes and cruelty against women and discrimination, because the provisions on adultery and concubinage, for example, which is still in existence today, it's easier to convict a man, it's easier to convict a woman, pardon me, in the case of adultery rather than of a man in concubinage. In adultery, one act of sexual intercourse is one count of adultery. But in concubinage, there are a lot of requirements before the man can be charged with concubinage, such as under a scandalous manner, for example, and cohabiting with the woman in a conjugal dwelling. Whereas in the case of the woman, an act of sexual intercourse is enough to convict her. And selected provisions from the Civil Code also remained, particularly on marriage in 1950, whereby a woman, for example, after her husband passed away, she will lose her parental authority over her children. But this will be changed after EDSA People Power Revolution with the Family Code of the Philippines, allowing the woman to retain her parental authority over her children, even if she remarry upon the passing of her husband. During the Third Republic onwards, Filipino women are no longer just subject of laws, but are now authors of their own law. In particular, I want to highlight this anti-violence against women and their children passed by Senator Loy Ejercito. Now, women are not just subjects of law, they are now authors of their own law. The anti-violence against women and children, or the VAUSI law, balance the discrimination provisions in the revised penal code, because here, even if the woman is not legally married to her partner, she can file charges of violence against him, and the concept of abuse was broadened, because now abuse is not just physical abuse, it can be emotional, it can be psychological, it can be financial. And more importantly so, it can also protect the children of the women, regardless of whether this is the natural child of her partner, but it aims to protect women and their children. Okay, moving forward, okay, what about in selected jurisprudence? In the Philippines, aside from the laws passed by the Congress, aside from the executive orders issued by the President, the decisions of the Supreme Court, the highest court of the land, also takes part of the legal body in the Philippines. And customarily, there are customs that limited the perception towards women. For example, Filipino women are viewed to be conservative, particularly in cases of rape. A woman that was raped will violently resist the perpetrator. That was the customary tradition of rape in the Philippines. But this was changed in the case of Karen Tayag Vertito versus the Philippines, because Karen Tayag Vertito took her case to CEDAW. And CEDAW, as an international tribune, their issuance will also take part of the law of the Philippines. And there, it was clarified in CEDAW that this customary perception towards women must be changed. Therefore, a legal procedure must be based on evidence and not towards custom. Because in the case of Karen Tayag Verdito, it was said that she did not resist violently, she did not run from her rapist, therefore she was not raped. So that was challenged in the CEDAW, and CEDAW said that customary provision must change and must not affect whatsoever the legal processes in the courts. In the case of Cheng Ming Choi versus Lau, in this case, there was the doctrine of triennial cohabitation. These are, one of the exceptions where annulment of cases, because in the Philippines we don't have a divorce law yet. Temporarily, divorce was allowed during the American occupation and the Japanese occupation. But after we were given independence, the tradition of the society protected the sanctity of marriage. So there were a lot of limitations or challenges before a marriage can be dissolved. In the case of Cheng Ming Choi versus Lau, in this case, triennial cohabitation provides that if a spouse, a woman, remains a virgin 3 years within the marriage, there were no consummation of marriage, that can be a ground for annulment. Reason because cohabitation and creation of the family of children is one of the important roles of spouses. So failure to do that case would be a ground for annulment. In the Republic versus Manalo, here it also protected women in the sense that if a woman was divorced by her spouse, by her alien spouse, for example, in Japan or in countries where divorce is allowed, initially that divorce would not be acknowledged in the Philippine courts because we do not have divorce. But in 2018, there was an update on that whereby it is said that in order to skew discrimination towards Filipino spouses, a divorce obtained by the spouse abroad, by the alien spouse abroad, must also be effective in the Philippines. Okay, so that is to avoid discrimination towards Filipino spouses. Lastly would be the Molina Doctrine versus updates in Tan Andal versus Andal. Here, it concerns with psychological incapacity, because psychological incapacity, this is one of the grounds usually applied for annulment in the Philippines. And initially in the Molina Doctrine, there has to be an evaluation by a psychiatrist in order to determine that a spouse is psychologically incapacitated to fulfill marriage. But there were updates in the case of Tan Andal versus Andal in 2021, whereby it is provided there that psychological incapacity is a case-to-case basis, and it is a personal basis. It need not be a scientific one, and it has to be based on evidence whether or not a spouse is incapacitated to fulfill the roles in marriage. So the above mentioned jurisprudence proved that perception towards Filipino women are evolving based on the decisions of the Supreme Court. Of course, the Supreme Court also has their limitations because, for one thing, they could not grant divorce. Exception would be if it is a divorce filed by the alien spouse abroad against the Filipina spouse. So,
sorry, Valerie.
Yes,
Valerie,
ma'am.
you do need to wrap up.
Okay, yes, thank you. So, these are some of the issues. So I presented earlier the laws and jurisprudence that that could be a lens in order to understand the triumphs and challenges of the Filipino woman. Thank you very much and good afternoon.
Thank you, Valerie, especially since you had to have a surprise presentation at the very last minute. It's fascinating to learn how the rights of the women in the Philippines have evolved, and hopefully it does continue to evolve. Right, our next speaker will be Han Tan Tan. If you do have questions for Valerie, do put them in the Q&A in the chat box, and we'll come to them at the end of the session. Pan, are you there?
Good afternoon. Hello.
Hello.
Yes.
Okay.
Nice
So you will have about 12 to 15 minutes. Can you share screen? Okay, great. It's all yours.
Okay, so today's presentation, my name is part of all. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Phan Thanh Thanh. Now I'm still conducting my PhD in Mahidol University in Thailand, and also researchers in Vietnam Academy of Social Science. My research topic is also part of my thesis. PhD thesis is named for today's presentation is Farmer Resistance Through the Lens of Social Movement, a case of agricultural land conversion in peri-urban Hanoi. Okay, so this is the background, and for the overall objective of the research, I try to explore the case from the point of view of economic and political rights. For the methodologies, it comes from both primary source and secondary source, with textual analysis of land law and key informant interview with the farmer as a protester in with the 30 farmers and 10 people from the local office in Van Giang as a case study. So for the research question, I have two research questions. The first one, how farmers resist and why there are different forms of resistance. And the second, I try to understand how the resistance turned into right claim, and if it leads to the regime change. So for the main argument of the two questions, the first main argument is farmer strategies are derived from formal to informal action. And the claim for land right go beyond the social economic rights, but it doesn't mean that it changed the political system of Vietnam. So why the case study? I choose the case of example because it's the well-known case and reported by many media in Vietnam and also overseas media. And second is the case located in peri-urban area is fascinating, developing and transforming very fast at the short time. And with the compensation right paid by the government for the development project for the private sector, that is create a lot of tension. So this is a case study. So for the background, Van Giang is the district located in the north of Hưng Yên, only 60 kilometers from the center of Hanoi and very convenient for traffic. So this why is where the land was converted very fastly. The issue that the farmer here was fighting for is the first one is the project has not been approved by the competent authority according to the perspective of the protester. And the second one, the local government and the developer also hides the project under the table, and that's why they impose the unsatisfactory land compensation according to the government bribe. So in the beginning, in 2012, when the protest was happening, there's some around 3,000 protesters come and join for the protest, but until now there's only 100 protesters left for complaining about the compensation of the project. For the theory I apply in this case study, the first one, to answer the first question, why farmer resist? How farmer resist and why there's different kind of resistance. I apply two theory. The first one, the rifle resistance, first coined by O'Brien and Lin in 1996 with the three dimension. The first one argues that farmers trying even when they protest or they disagree, discontent about the project, they try to following the law to protest. And it does not challenge the legitimacy of the law, policy, or core value of the ruler, but follow the existing law, such as using petition campaign to legalize a resistance activity. In fact, this strategy is to accept the legitimacy of the law, policy, and core political values of the state to protest, and only happen when the government fails to fulfill the promise. And secondly, they making use of different channels to disseminate about the idea of the resistance. Those channels are the weapon for dialogue with authority to seek attention of the elite to influence public opinion. And the last one, to make use of collective action and public and open protest to make their voice heard and their identity visible. And the second one is civil disobedience. The theory may first coined by John Raw in 1971, and also developed with Rahman in 2015. For the civil disobedience, there's some main factor. First is the public confrontation. Second is illegal, according to the law, or symbolic protest, but illegal in nature to protest some specific law, policy, or government decision that seem to be illegitimate. And the third one is sticking chains by the peaceful protest, but not opposed to it's non-violent. The fourth is willingly to accept being arrested or punished or get the suffering from the legal consequences, such as sending to the prison because of making action in the public space and go against the government policy and decision. So this is the main factor, but from my framework, I just use three elements. First is petition, the second symbolic and public protest, and the last one is making use of the channels such as internet and social media as a strategy and tactics of the protester. To answer the second research question, how resistance turned into the right claim of the farmer, I apply the theory of citizenship. There's many definitions of citizenship, but I use the parent short at ON in 2018 because they have case study of ASEAN countries such as Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam as case study. So it's very close to the country, the cultural context. The first element is the argument is the role of elite and patronage network in providing space for citizenship of the local people. The second is a community identity in the formation of civil rights. The third is the role of middle class. And the final is the political space, public political space in Vietnam. But in this context, the grassroots social movement for land grabbing is internet and social network, social media is the play important role for the grassroots movement in Vietnam. So that's the theory. And for the research finding, there are two main research findings. The first is the form of resistance. So for the form of resistance, there's a different strategy. First one, the farmer tries to make use of petition for their structure of a land acquisition. In nature, this method is following the law and the authority of the state to solve the problem. Because farmers in Southeast Asian country in general and in Vietnam in particular are very legitimate in approaching the problem, as the discussion by Abdul in 1996, Kiên Viết in 2005, or Nguyen et al. In 2015, because most oppressed group like farmers tend to accept the rule of the game. So they try to ensure the security and stability and not make the authority get angry. So they try to make it calm and peaceful as possible. So the Van Giang farmer also following this rule and applying for their strategy for protesting. They relying on the applicable law of Vietnam, such as land law on complaint and denunciations, and the right to file a complaint to resist. During more than 10 years, the land movement in Van Giang used variety of methods to resist based on the law provision. They have sent dozens of petitions from the local level, such as district and province, central level, such as government office of the government, of high level of the politician, and Vietnamese Farmer Front, Vietnamese Fatherland Front, to avoid the violating the law. Besides, they also asking for direct negotiation with the higher leader of the authority when there was no final solution was to be made after the many letters have been sent and have long time with no answer. So they also, at the second level, they ask for negotiation directly. They also ask a different way. And finally, with a lot of effort to be made, finally, on October 8 of 2017, the movement leader in Van Giang, consisting 6 representatives from 3 communes who lost the land, start talking with the leader of Hưng Yên province. The lawyer of the protester also sent officer request to work together in the conversation as the legal representative of the people, but province government did not agree. However, they feel somewhat comfort when the authority in that working session rely about their mistake in the case, in solving the case. So, and they realize that the ability to solve the case to the end is difficult when the root cause lie into the higher level and the land law. So there's a quotation from the leader, protest leader, when I visit him and interview in 2019. He said in the meeting, Hưng Yên chairman said, since your time to comment and suggest from the people, and he feel that he feels some justice because he can meet the leader, he can meet the local authority to discuss about the issue. However, from this provincial government could not touch the higher government level, and the group of protesters have come to the reception office to request the higher government inspector in coordination with the central mass organization and provincial leader and the people who not yet agree with the project to have dialogue. And people must, so people still fight until the law is transparent. And the demanding of dialogue is mandatory with the government to avoid complaint over authority. And for the second strategy, symbolic and public protest, similar to many cases of land protests in Vietnam. The protest leader also tries to make use of some symbol recognized by the state and the party, such as the flag and the picture of Ho Chi Minh as the leader of the VCP, to show their loyalty to the state and have no demanding to overthrow the power. So it is the part of their tactic for symbolic protest. And the second, they try to keep the protest calm and peaceful. Even there's some case that the protesters were attacked by someone who hide by the private company, which is the developer and investor of the project. and the leader was beat until sent to the hospital, was sent to the hospital several times already, but there's no. But they still try to keep calm and not to violate the law. So never. So. So just keep calm and accept the fact that they cannot defend.
And I'm sorry, but you really must wrap up if you can.
Okay.
Summarize.
Okay, so finally, the protest is take a long time. Sorry, and until now, the small number of protesters continue until now because of many pressure. And the third form of strategy is the making use of social media. So because they cannot only trust in the official channel to convey the message and to channel about the protest. So there's many kind of form of such as they seek support from the outsiders, such as Vietnamese language press, but from the other country to support their voice, to raise their voice. And since 2006, there's around 200 newsletters and blog about the land enforcement in the case on the social media and in the internet. And even though there's some very contradictory views about the case, some raise the contrary view that urban development and infrastructure development is necessary to make the change, to make the country become more economically successful and development. So since the beginning, but there's some other also raise the issue that about justice in land grabbing, because many farmers was lost land without the consent in the beginning, and it's impact to their life not only in terms of the land but livelihood, a sustainable livelihood, and the demand for the justice. That's the reason why until now there's with many pressures they continue to fight to the end. For the second argument, and also the second finding, is the extension of land right to the human right claim. So for the first, following the framework, the first is the role of local elite in supporting and managing the citizenship in Bandang, reflect from at the local level. An author in Vietnam also write about the topic. He mentioned that the nature of the regime under the rule of the VCP includes three main characteristics. The first one is the nature of the regime is expressed through via authoritarian in which the VCP respond to respect public and put them in mechanism to absorb and manage the citizen outrage. The second dimension of the local participation, political participation, is the nature of the regime, also expressed through competitive authoritarian. That is, the government creates a competitive space to allow democracy to be exercised some way within the party. And the third is the character of the regime is also represented by totalitarianism, which means that political opposition is still unacceptable. So the author also argues that the authority in Vietnam use this mechanism skillfully and flexibly to ensure the local people participate at the local level and more without changing the leadership of the party. this argument. So from the case, from the case, it shows that there's the participation at the local level were made among it's just like it's not truly participation, but the voice of the people who agree will be accepted, but the voice of the disagree protesters are neglect and also will get pressures in many ways. It's not really democracy, it's not really truly participate at the local level, but it's still managed by some local leaders to manage the voice around. So the second one is the element of community identity.
I'm sorry, Pan, you really do have to wrap up.
Okay, so for the third is the middle class. The role of middle class. There's so many movements in Vietnam about environment and other issues, but the middle class role in the case of land grabbing is limited. There's no visibility of the middle class in this case of grassroots democracy. So it makes the voice of social isolation become and inequality becomes stronger, and the gap between the less citizen, the less advantage, less voice, and less heard by the central government. So that's why they try to negotiate by different way and always send a petition over the authority to solve the issue, because this voice is not heard if they are not sending to the central government. So, okay, so finally, the role of social media I have mentioned, and what they claim for is not the farmer is not only claim for secular land right, but also the right to livelihood, right to information and participation, also the right to compensation negotiation freely. So the case of land protest in Van Sang is not new and it's not unique. There's other many land protests happened in the past, but also disappear quickly, although the case of Van Sang has some certain recognition of public opinion and attention of the government. They all end after the pressures and method government increase the pressure and repression of the authority. There's some achievement and success of the story is that in 2007, the first response of the government was send the investigation the local areas, and they conclude that there's no serious violation were found, so that the project continued, and the farmers still lost the land. And second, because of pressure from the farmer, provincial government together with the developer also give some service land to the farmer to convert their job, to convert their livelihood from farmer to being the trader and service provider. And lastly, they also some increasing in compensation for the land. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pan. Okay, thank you. That was very interesting. And sadly, this is a situation that occurs across Southeast Asia in many places. So now we move to Mifachol Choir. I think you were there just now. Coming in from Mahidol University as well. Yes, that's a screen sharing. Do introduce yourself as well, yeah? So you have about 12 to 15 minutes. We are quite behind time, but that's all right. All yours.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, all good.
Yeah. Okay, it's kind of echo before, so is it better now? Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Miftah Khoyer. I'm a postgraduate student at the Institute of Human Rights and Peace Studies, my university, Bangkok, Thailand. So today I would like to share my research on the cultural process of human rights in non-governmental NGO in Indonesia. Yeah, so basically, my research concern about how does the NGO in Indonesia perform and mobilize movement against corruption specifically, despite the unfavorable environment. Because previous research on social movement in Indonesia, they argue that because of the new order legacy of the politicized citizen, disorganized citizen, and also political repression toward protests, it is very skeptical that civil movement can broaden change, can mobilize participants in post-authoritarian Indonesia. Or if they could, it probably limited or weakened over the past few years with the Indonesian democratization has been declined. But in the past decade, we also saw that there's a lot of anti-corruption movement in Indonesia. We have Ishak versus Buaya to defend the Corruption Eradication Commission. We have advocacy to support Novel Baswedan, which is a investigator of KPK that is attacked. And also finally, 3 years ago, we have Reformasi di Korupsi or the Reformist Corruption movement. So basically it says that despite all of these challenges, despite all of this constraint, both from the politicized citizen and the political repression, there is still protest in Indonesia. So basically it is already an achievement. So that's why I think the research should be focused on discussing the process on how the non-governmental NGO in Indonesia as the social movement actor in Indonesia, how they could form and mobilize public participant in a protest. And I argue that what the NGO did was they framed corruption into a human rights issue, basically. I wouldn't spend much time on this slide, so basically what I'm trying to say is that when the NGO try to frame corruption as human right, they try to create some sort of like human face of corruption. Like how does the corruption can impact their daily life? Because when it comes to anti-corruption movement worldwide, there also discussion that saying that it is very difficult to define corruption. It is very difficult to measure or explain corruption. Yes, there is UNCAC, there is Transparency International with the CPI and all, but some research also suggests that the international norm against corruption, it's not very contextualized to global south context, which mostly corruption depends on how does the authority manage on or how the political actors play a role in it, and also it is different to determine it or to measure it in as opposed to the CPI, for instance. So that's why by framing corruption as human right, the social movement actor, they try to provide what could be the impact of corruption, who is the ignored or the marginalized sectors when it comes to corruption. Because in the UNCAC, when it comes to the impact of corruption, they do mention that it could damage the well-being, it could damage the good government, democratic system, but it's not very personal. So when turning corruption into human right, they make corruption is much more a personal issue. And finally, it also provide a responsible actor. Who should we held responsible when it comes to corruption? And finally, the process on how the NGO try to turn corruption into human right is vernacularization of human right. Basically, in other cases across the globe, it's already been argued that by using corruption, by using a certain issue and frame it as a human right issue, it could provide an entry point to discuss about justice, inequality, and power imbalance. Especially, it's very suitable in the context of Indonesia, where after the purge on communists back in 1965, it's very difficult for us to discuss about justice. And even in the curriculum, even in the school, when we talk about corruption, we only talk about it as in a moralistic perspective. We only talk about it in terms of integrity. Even in the government anti-corruption strategy, they did not mention any sort of like political party. They did not mention anything about power imbalance or conflict of interest. So that's why I argue that by creating corruption as a human right, the social movement activists, they also try to package what corruption is in Indonesia. And then they could use it to attract participants, to recruit participants, and to mobilize it. So initially, this corruption as human right frame serve as a collective action that resonates with the public grievance, that resonates with their symbol, that resonates with what happened in their daily life, so that those people in the street, those people in the university, in the school, they would like to join the protest in 2019 or in those protests to support KDK, for instance. Yeah. Wait. Okay. So basically, in this research, I would like to case study one anti-corruption NGO in Indonesia, the Indonesia Corruption Watch, which was established, if I'm not mistaken, in 1998, aimed at encouraging public participation against corruption and to advocate anti-corruption legal framework. And they did a lot of activity from legal advocacy. They were there when the government created the KDK and any other corruption-related legal framework. They create a lot of research to expose certain people behind corruption or to support government policy or for the sake of capacity building. They also expose corruption actors. They even handled the case of corruption in the local area. They also did court monitoring and coalition building with journalists, with the university, with the students and all. But specifically, what I would like to address is how does the ICW try to frame corruption as it evidence in two of their dominant strategy, with this anti-corruption academy, which is the e-learning platform to educate the public regarding the corruption both in theory and in practice, and also the anti-corruption school or SAKTI, which is similar to the e-learning platform, but it's more intensive and more specific and exclusive as well. So basically, this is the case study I would like to highlight in my this research. And I found out that there are 4 stages and there are 4 ways that ICW try to frame corruption. So the first stage is that when you want to frame corruption as human rights, you need to name, define, and explain what corruption is, and try to relate in what way it could be considered as a human rights violation. And according to the UNCAC, corruption is a misuse of authority. So it's mostly it's also only limited to petty corruption or administrative corruption. But in their article of association, ICW stated that in Indonesia, corruption could not be only defined by the UNCAC standard, because what happened in Indonesia is corruption intertwined with shrinking civic space, political regime. That's why they create a new definition, new concept of corruption, which they include the political clause in corruption, which is political corruption, which they define as abuse of authority exercised by political actors. So they highlight that political actor here as the perpetrator of corruption, rather than the administrative one, rather than the bureaucratic. And also they're shifting the corruption from in the individual level to more systemic. So the corruption is not only happened by the lack of integrity or lack of moral, but it also could happen because of the electoral regime. It causes corruption because it's so expensive to join political party. That's why those politicians resort to illicit funding. And then at the same time, they also mentioned that it is the oligarch as the driving force on corruption in Indonesia. Well, I'm not trying to argue which kind of oligarch that is matters according to ICW, but I would like to pay more attention to how the ICW use the term corruption in their activity and in their attempt to frame corruption as a human right. So basically, by using oligarch, they have the opportunity to expose and identify the puppet master behind the corruption. So in a way, corruption is much more identifiable. It is no longer an abstract term. It's no longer something that is very far away from us, but we know who's behind these certain corruption cases. And the second part or second phase of ICW attempt is to personalizing the corruption. So basically, after they define, after they name, after they explain the corruption, they need to do another process as well, because despite they already explained it very comprehensively, it is very difficult because public in Indonesia, they wouldn't really pay attention to corruption. In fact, they normalize it by money politics, by participating in money buying. In fact, I think a few years ago, the former chair of parliament, Fadlizon, he stated that corruption is a lubricant of development, and the chief executive of President Muldoko, he stated that KPK hinders development. So basically, corruption is normalized. So how could you combat corruption with people when the people itself normalize corruption? It's another question. And the way to do that with the human rights frame, ICW tried to make it resonate with the grievance and establish the referent actor of human rights violation. So in this part, it will be much more clearer in what way ICW can construct the human rights. So basically, in the Academy Anti-Corruption course, they claim that corruption caused loss of state wealth and led to poverty and inequality. And they specifically stated, based on their research as well, that at least 124 trillion of Indonesian wealth was stolen due to corruption in Indonesia, and those money could be used to construct at least 120 public housing. They also, so basically in this way, they try to make that corruption does really impact to yourself. You could not access school, you could not have any housing, you could not have any access to health. It is because of corruption. So corruption has become some sort of explanation toward any issues in Indonesia, basically. And also this way, ICW tried to hold the government responsibility regarding the corruption itself. They stated that the government should take affirmative action to eradicate structural barrier to corruption that hinders the right of vulnerable group, rights to education, and equality. So basically, what they are trying to say is that when you cannot access education, when you cannot access health service and all, or any public service, that means you're already the victim of corruption. Basically, that's what they mean by rights to free from corruption. So, but other than the public itself, they also try to victimize the democratization of Indonesia as the victim of corruption. So basically, ICW stated that corruption creates unfair practices of law, where in Indonesian discourse, it's very common that the law is very unfair to those who are unprivileged, but it is very, very favorable toward those who, let's say, elite people. So, and ICW tried to say that corruption case is one of the example where those people in the politician in the parliament that was conducting corruption, they could not get a proper punishment. They can only like sentence in 1 or 2 years, but those people who only stole chicken or rice, they can probably spend 5 to 10 years in jail. So basically, it creates unfair practices of law, the corruption is. So to summarize it, basically what I'm trying to say is that by this process, ICW tried to show the public that they were entitled to live in a polity that is free from corruption. And to fight against corruption is a means to realize their rights to education, to realize their rights to health and education and all. But despite they already name it, define it, and make corruption more closely to the people, to bring those people to join corruption movement, it is another issue as well, because due to the new order legacy, the social movement is very disorganized. Not to mention political repression and limited access to formal decision-making process. So basically, the pictures on the right are those the anti-corruption activists that were harassed by the government. Novel Baswedan were attacked by arson. Haris Azhar and Fathia were defamed. Charged by defamation last year, and those protesters in the Reformasi di Korupsi movement were beaten by the police. So basically, it is very dangerous and very difficult to fight for corruption. At the same time, people might say that, why don't you go to the parliament? Why don't you go change from the within? That's not the same thing either. That's not easy thing either, because it is very expensive to go to politics in Indonesia. So basically what ICW is trying to do is that they try to show the public that they need to fight for corruption, but at the same time, they need to ensure that those anti-corruption activities should be secure, can be protect themselves and wouldn't harm them. And what they did was, in the Academy Anti-Corruption, there's a course called Critical Pedagogy and Anti-Corruption, where they were highly inspired by the works of Paulo Freire, basically. And in that course, they try to incite the critical consciousness among citizens and create, and by basically saying that, by basically encouraging the participant to question the social and political reality. What is corruption? Why is it always happen in Indonesia despite KPK already exists? Why is it always happen in Indonesia despite we already democratized since 1998? So ICW in this course, they try to encourage people to keep questioning that question and to finally deconstruct the dominant approach of corruption in Indonesia, which is the moralistic approach, which was encouraged by the government. And also they also encouraged to practice the case study of corruption in their respective countries. So basically, they also try to show that corruption is not only happen in Jakarta. Corruption is not only happen or not only what they see in the television, but it could also happen in your local district. It could also happen in your, let's say, school. It could also happen in when you try to apply for driving license. So basically, it happen anywhere. And that's why ICW are try to create 12 anti-corruption modules. But the most dominant one is they try to create some sort of how they can use the rights to information. So if I'm not mistaken, there are a lot of modules that aim the participant to submit an appeal to the Commission of Information, so that these people, they can ask for accountability regarding certain projects. They can ask regarding the transparency about it, and they also try to some sort of monitoring the public service. There are indicators about it. So basically, this way they try to make anti-corruption movement be more secure, measurable, and also serve in a way that it could create some sort of achievement when it comes to anti-corruption movement. And it also relates to the previous conception that corruption is systemic, and the people itself, they have more role rather than just raising awareness or refraining the public from corruption practice. So basically, public has the opportunity to investigate the corruption themselves. People can have the opportunity to, let's say, conduct their own campaign or other political measure to combat corruption. So anyone can be participate in combating corruption in Indonesia. So after they finished all of the framing corruption into human rights, the next step they did was to circulate their anti-corruption meaning, and they did it through the Sekolah Anti-Corruption for Anti-Corruption School, Sakti, which is an attempt to adapt the strict political context. So in this activity, the ICW anti-corruption norm travels across Indonesia. It's not only located in Jakarta anymore. It's not located in ICW office anymore in South Jakarta, but it also travels to people in Jayapura. It's also traveled to those who located in Medan, in Pontianak. So basically, Sakti is an intensive program that gathered at least 20 or 30 participants from across Indonesia, where they were trained on corruption theory and practice. They would learn a lot of material from practices, corruption history, sociological aspect of corruption, Marxian aspect of corruption, advocacy technique, investigative technique, everything. So basically, in this activity, they were able to set the local corruption cases, analyze it with the anti-corruption framework, and identify the measure that can be done using the ICW framework. So basically, this also become a platform where ICW try to marketize and try to promote the previous method of anti-corruption. And also with the material such as Marxian perspective of corruption, political history of Indonesia, they try to avoid the historical and the moralist conception of corruption. Now, I'm not trying to say that it is wrong, but what ICW did was they tried to widen that corruption could be extended to anywhere. What happened today in corruption in Indonesia, we could draw it back from what happened in Suharto Era or even in Sukarno Era, basically. And also,
I'm sorry, you would have to wrap up.
Because when you talk about Marxism, when you talk about investigation, you will get arrested by everyone. Basically, Indonesia probably will get arrested as well. And also, by this process, they also encourage the participants to develop their own anti-corruption method. said they would depend on CPI. They wouldn't depend.
Thank you ya Bu Imas. Yo, bye bye. Yes,
ICW anti-corruption method. Basically, they could be as creative as they could to create their own measure or explanation to their own local area corruption case. And finally, they would visit places like.
I'm sorry, you have to wrap up.
Basically, to prove that corruption cause human rights violation. So it's like in the legal institute, they will see people who were enforced by their places. They will see people that was, let's say, getting unfair practices of law, and they see that this is happened because of corruption. They provide a very clear explanation about it. And then finally, those people,
I'm sorry, Mifachul.
after they finish
have to wrap up. We are over time.
They return to their home, but they were assigned by the ICW to create activities that related to corruption. It could be investigate the corruption cases in their own community. Mostly, it's about the appeal to conviction of information, campaign, coalition building. But basically, what I'm trying to say in this process is that before the ICW, they try to vernacularize or they try to adapt the international anti-corruption norm into Indonesia context. Now, this is the assignment of the participant of Sakti to vernacularize anti-corruption into a more narrower local context of Indonesia, basically. Because when you talk about corruption in Indonesia, local culture in Indonesia is very wide, it's very diverse. And this way they also multiply the meaning of corruption into wider Indonesian public. Those who did not join or did not even familiar with ICW, they could understand that corruption is a human rights issue now. And finally, it could also create shared discourse that corruption is not only a Jakarta issue. It's also issue in Bali. It's also issue in Jayapura, but with a different meaning or a different causes or any different explanation, basically. And also the same
thank you.
Naming and shaming and all. And finally, we reach the conclusion. So basically, the conclusion is that I argue that ICW and social movement actors in Indonesia, they construct the meaning of rights to free from corruption. Corruption now is a, yeah, just a minute. Reframe it to a structural issue. Corruption is personal now, and they use that as a frame to mobilize public participants and also to jump into the debate of discourse regarding social movement in Indonesia. Human rights could be the alternative frame to discuss grievance and injustice in Indonesia. And finally, I argue that social movement actors in Indonesia is not dependent to political opportunity. As the previous study argued, they were dependent, they were creative actors, they were have a courage and innovative way to interpret the social practices and political opportunities in Indonesia. So yeah, finally, that's all my presentation. I'm sorry if I'm past the time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mifachul. I think you can't hear when you are speaking. We have two more speakers actually. So we have Herlambang, who has actually shared his slides with everyone. But yes, it's your turn now. 12 to 15 minutes. Thank you very much. Mifachul, you need to mute your screen, your Zoom, please. Okay.
I did. Okay, sorry. Yeah, thank you, Serina. I'm Erlambang from Universitas Gadjah Mada and also LP3IS. Previous presentation, it was related to the normalization of corruption, and perhaps this is the optimistic, that or positive side in opposing such normalization of corruptions, because student press journalism provide alternatives in making narrative. The politics of student press journalism in Indonesia, this is just preliminary findings of my current research. not finished yet, so that's why it might be improved later on. Okay, there are several research questions that I'm doing now. First, it's related to how to explain actually the student press journalism, especially to what extent they have been protected under Indonesian legal system, and also how they fight in order to promote freedom of expression, the press and academic freedom, and the third one is to what extent does the effectiveness of their movement, especially in influencing policies or other strategies to change. And the last one is how do they connect their press activities to larger strategic social movement at ground. I could not present all answer on this, but I just to promote my work currently, especially looking at several cases. The first one, it was in 2019, Suara USU. It was a student press journalism based in Medan, published a short story on LGBT. The title was When Everyone Refuses My Presence Nearby. And they got attacked by dissolvement, the editorial management, and also destroying the office. And however, the students also try to oppose that by campaigning to promote academic freedom and the press, and asking the rector to withdraw its decisions, and also building strategic alliance throughout Indonesia. The second case is related to Lintas magazine. After reporting, after investigative reporting on 32 victims of sexual violence, involve lecturers, staff, and students in Islamic University in Ambon. It was reported in January 2022. Of course, the students got attacked also. Those who are in editorial board were dismissed, and they were also reported to the police for criminal charge, especially cyber defamation, and also physical violence, dissolving the student press, and replaced with new editorial team. Students, of course, try to make a struggle in order to oppose that violence or attacks by reporting to ombudsman for maladministrations, and also file to sue to administrative court. Now it's still running, and 2 weeks ago I was presenting my comments in my witness in before the court. And also campaigning press freedom and academic freedom, building strategic network for legal advocacy and alternative social politics transformative. The last one, the case study 3, it's related to PENS, Teropong. This is a technical university. They actually not reporting yet, but they held discussions, especially related to Papua. They got attacks by, for instance, like police required official permit, and then university management response by pushing to stop the discussion and dissolving student press. And this, of course, connected to the large protest, against racism in various places, and also got intimidation. Students also try to make a struggle by campaigning to promote academic freedom and the press, building strategic network with independent journalist associations for advocacy. What will be the interesting from this study? From legal sides, of course, we would like to know legal framework, to what extent they are protected. Of course, according to the Committee of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, especially paragraph 38 mentioning about the student is also part of academic freedom, and they have similar rights to lecturers or other researchers. And 39, paragraph 39, it's related to the rights and also the freedoms, including individual freedom, freedom of expressions, and association, and etc. The 40, paragraph 40, it relates to the requirement for autonomy of institutions. And we have also Surabaya Principles on Academic Freedom, also promoted by SIHAN and promoted by groups of human rights lecturers in Indonesia, in order to defend students, lecturers, or researchers in Indonesia. And we use this at the court and also through various policy advocacy. And what will be the remarks on this issue? I already considered to limit myself. First, this is about case studies, for instance, like Papua, sexual orientations, and sexual violence. Actually, these are really representing critical thinking, exercise among youth, and also social protest and solidarity. PERSMA, or student press journalism, seeks to learn journalistic writing standards according to a code of ethics, being professional, investigative, and carries public interest. The other interesting is related to dynamics, contextual issues related to political, economic, power relations, because as you have known that many attacks actually relates to the stigmatization of communism, especially in the early of 2015 until 2017 or 2018, then intolerance of religious freedom, corporate pressure on campuses, corruptor retaliations, discrimination against and racism, and disciplinary issues due to bureaucratizations and campus commercializations. But now we have Papua sexual orientation and sexual violence getting more increasing issues that it's really making attacks at the press student journalism. However, as we have seen, this is not surprising at all, because this is part of the hegemonic and dominant power to silence criticism, targeting any political or social sensitive and arbitrarily attacks and no legal basis, actually, censorship and suppressions. No considerations, especially to freedom of the press as well as academic freedom. And what we have seen also happen in the court or legal law enforcement. But interestingly, from these cases actually reflecting strategic alliances among journalists, human rights groups, non-governmental organizations, academia, press legal aid, and the more important is reconsolidating local and also national local coalitions and effort to change the situations. Because of PPME, this is a national-based coalition of journalists among student press journalism, also took very influential roles in changing the situations. My last slide is how do they connect with their press activities to a large social movement in Indonesia. Of course, many studies already mentioned that student press journalism as an embryo for student movement, representing progressive local politics through student organizations. But now, really a growing numbers of student press journalism seeking legal protection from academic freedom and press freedom at the same time. Because this is possible to bring this message into table. And then second, dynamic character of student press. Of course, we can characterize 1950s to 1960s or 1960s to 1990s because of New Order authoritarian regime. But now, parallel to political context, again, it also influenced the counter of attacks, because the use of what we call of the problem in current debates is it is related to media ownership, political economy framing, and also in the age of deceptions, because the use of technological manipulations and embedded oligarch politics through formal representative system. In having these situations, student press journalism become alternative, in my view so far, in providing space for more meaningful to provide alternative narratives, social movement, and also reflecting by youth generation. So not really a dominant characterized always with the oligarch politics in the country. So that's all my presentations. We could continue in Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting, these debates on corruption in Indonesia. I second this message from the AlterSEA committee to say that, it's amazing how our Indonesian colleagues are so well connected, and they have these peer networks that can work together to co-create knowledge. So we see a lot of this happening across Indonesia. So thank you. This has been very interesting. And so we come to the last question, the last presentation, which was supposed to be the first, a group from, again, Mahidol University. Eduardo has had to leave for class, but he bids his farewell in a chat. So now we wait for Tamiko, Sudarat. Are you all here?
So I'm Tamiko Robinson, and I'm the one who's going to represent our group's proposal and our participation today. We have distributed our participation, and I am so sorry about, or I want to thank everyone for accommodating. I teach, and so I actually wasn't originally the person who was presenting today, and maybe some of you know, but we have had a national disaster, and some of my students were the victims of that, and so I was attending to that. So I will do my best right now, to kind of shift my accountability to this group that's been assembled, and thank you so much for letting me participate. So I think you can see my screen right now. Is that right? Yeah. And so again, so I'm representing, I'm speaking to you from South Korea. I'm at Hanyang University. I represent a consortia of different groups, both in Thailand and in South Korea, and included, there are about 7 universities total, maybe over 100 migrant worker NGO groups, and we're trying to work on, while some of us have worked with each other for over a decade in different capacities, what we're presenting here today for discussion is a kind of effort to assemble a participatory action research project, and that's commenced this fall, and so we submitted it to this methods section. So a few of our goals, we were really interested in trying to figure out a way to conceptualize participatory regional and national level policy setting that involves migrant rights, migration policy, employment industry, and brokerage practices. We're interested in developing a transnational migrant legal advocate network and resources for transnational justice, for unpaid wages, injury and death, and for workers and families. We're interested in resetting national and regional news frames. So some of us are, we are positioned in different sectors and in different, by way of introduction, I work in journalism. We develop a consumer consciousness campaign for food supply chain responsibility across our countries, kind of region to region, and so on. And then also develop a system register and find work with best practices for fair labor, direct hiring in agricultural and fisheries, seafood processing employees and employers. So these are some of our objectives and our questions that we have. Some of you, I think, might be familiar with some of the work that we've done in another configuration. For the past few years, we've been working on, especially working together to invent precarity and repatriation. So we've been doing research, co-research together, kind of. And so this is a representation of us looking at what the dominant media discourses were, but also to various efforts to intervene and shift them from various respective seasonal, sensational, spectacular stories to ones that really start shifting towards a realization of rights. across Thailand and South Korea specifically, but that also learns from folks who are advocating and working in Indonesia, Taiwan, and more. So this is an example of some of that work, right? So kind of starting to shift the discourse from PPE distribution to visa extensions, extending testing and medical treatment. So we have dilemmas, and many of you are well informed of this or know these well, and maybe have better strategies or can speak to this even better than I. But we, each of us respectively across our different positions, we're interested in how we acknowledge and then kind of leverage or strengthen where there are gaps and challenges. And so we have, right, again, involved in our work together. We have migrant worker advocate organizations who've acknowledged being overwhelmed in regards to being direct service organizers, either focusing on a particular kind of service like legal assistance or shelter housing or policy advocacy. And then, it's one thing to respond to government policies and employers' poor practices, another to advocate and work on policy and development of new legislation. There are academic and migrant advocate silo effects. We have also ourselves experienced being separated across policy and activism sectors rather than working together across sectors. There have been limits in transnational and regional support. And then we see in this area, especially exacerbated from COVID-19 and a shift in particularly news entities from Western news entities in the US, where we see different desks reorganizing, relocating their headquarters in Asia and South Asia relative to the UK or the US, where we see some of the migration journalism that's been produced tends to exacerbate some problems that require solutions. So, while there are these dilemmas, I think that there are also strengths and resources. And so Migrant Working Group has long engaged in evidence-based research. For example, academics are often engaging in producing reports to various national, supranational entities, but sometimes what we intend those reports to be serving might be counter to what we're seeking, right, or what we intend. So maybe we intend them to be serving rights protection, but instead they end up serving monitoring functions. And there's more to go over, but I want to be mindful. I know that there's not so much time. So when we surveyed each other in regards to our challenges, whether or not it's student journalists in the classes, ourselves, myself as an academic and a journalist, migrant workers, all across the board, we found that we also could be sentiments that were expressed in. Suddenly there's an echo. Oh, okay. In this UK study about reasons for avoiding the news, we all seem to be in the same place here, right? There's a negative impact. What can we do? And so on. And so relative to maybe we might be optimistic about policy setting, we had incredible pessimism about news frame setting. So we have taken inventory where we are, although we have different goals, where we are on each of the goals. And then there's a focus right now, and we intend for it to shift and grow as our capacity develops in terms of our focus. But for this year, for this iteration, we've been focusing on informal and irregular worker areas, agricultural, fisheries, domestic elder care, and tourism, and both domestic migrants and international foreign migrants. And there are reasons, and I know that there's writing on the slide, but I want to say that when we look at not only because we have longstanding collegial and solidarity relationships, but when we look at why we would particularly bring activists and academics and students and reporters from Thailand and South Korea together. Some of the things that we were interested in is recognizing a few things. One is that there are some similar in-migration flows that are occurring. And then also too, when we forecast the future and upcoming areas, we see that there's three kind of commonalities in regards to elder care and domestic work, fisheries and seafaring, seafood processing, and then also aging agricultural areas. And so how we respond or how to these areas is something that we can definitely learn from. However, in addition to that, across both countries, we feel like we have strong worker-centered coalitional efforts that we've already previously learned from and have are committed to really thinking about what are these conditions that produce legally, socially, politically bound dualities of citizen, non-citizen, host, guest, legal, illegal, immigrant, migrant, skilled, unskilled, freedom, lack of freedom, and more. So that's said, I'm presenting from here, from Korea. So some strength that I think that our part of the network brings is that we have realized a number of kind of interesting rights-based initiatives. We've had migrant worker television, migrant worker festival. We have considerable journalist ethics and guidelines that have been developed in regards to how to cover migrations reporting. And then we've also been looking across then to other kind of participatory action research examples to try to figure out what else we could be learning from. And so this is one that we were looking at where maybe some of you know better, but Migrantes de Otro Mundo, where they were working across a number of countries to really investigate the story of migrants from Asia and Africa who travel through Latin America. And so we have been inspired by some of their lessons and some of their challenges. And so when it comes to agenda setting or money reallocation and resourcing between countries, between NGOs and universities, between policy sectors that have different priorities or different funding streams, different work hours, different seasonal, different challenges and resources. So this is something that was actually developed from students who are in our network. And so some of you might recognize this as articulated in some places as a kind of solution journalism. But it was interesting to kind of take this as our criteria in terms of what we mean as critical participatory action research. And I think I'm really sensitive right now to thinking about students setting an agenda. And the previous presentation was really interesting to me, this notion about student press movements. So we have across the universities in Thailand and Korea, students who really want to talk about accountability, about the ability to constitute and create a better place, create positive social impact, provide a longitudinal comparative perspective, and to figure out what it is we could both collectively want. Our list of activities are broad, and so just to highlight them, there's been an ILO agricultural report launched that was in March. There's a fisheries multi-sector policy dialogue in June. We had a migration journalism training for students in Thailand and South Korea in August and September. We have one coming up for professional journalists across Asia and South Asia in later this year. And we're in discussion with various entities on that. And then there have been, there was a convening of agricultural migrant workers that was co-sponsored by ILO and the Human Rights Development Foundation, the MAP Foundation, I believe EJF. And so just to give some texture, I think, of the method that I wanted to share or highlight is that, it's been interesting in terms of figuring out where the gaps are and where the need for change is. And so, these are resources that were provided in training to members in our network from EJF, and they have achieved certain kinds of commitments regarding both South Korea and Thailand in regards to improving things in the fisheries sector. There have been different policy recommendations regarding what it means to have sustainable, legal, ethical practices in fishery. And when it comes, though, to feedback from students or resetting, policy setting from the migrant worker groups across the countries, we still see there is a lack, though, right, in regards to migration story angles or the impact of news on biases and misperceptions. There's a necessity for more evidence-based reporting. So these were some of the summaries that we've been working on. And migration consistency in migration terminology, what migration news problems and solutions get covered. And we've had in Thailand, and then, so the slide is for Thailand, but we've had groups go on site visits together and educate each other. So these are 3 site visits in Thailand with LPN, MWRN, and ROC's Thai Foundation, covering elections for union organizing, health education and health access, testing, wage recovery, and then this is along the way, we've also tried to open communication across different constituents in regards to questions they have. So this is a question that was asked from a group of students to members of the migrant working group and also some of the academics who work on policy recommendations. And so they had done a site visit with migrant working group, and then they reflected, and then they had some questions about access to public health. And so, and then this is a response that was assembled to them. And so we have just started. And so this is a little bit preliminary, I guess, in terms of offering this up and this kind of work, but we are really interested in participating in this question about methods. So thank you everyone for your time.
Thank you very much, Tamiko. And, our deepest condolences for terrible events on Halloween night. That's shocking. But thank you for being here in spite of the difficult situation and for sharing what you're doing. It's amazing work across the seas. It's great to know that it's happening. Thank you so much. We have about, unfortunately, just 3 minutes or so to do Q&A. There have been questions that are answered in the chat box. Thank you very much for that. Mifachul, in the chat box, if you could possibly respond in the chat box. There was a question that was asking, hang on, yeah, I'm looking for the one that you have not answered, whether there is an index on public perception of corruption and what this index means. If you don't mind answering that question in the chat box, perhaps Erlambang can answer this question from the AlterSEA team. Just now when they said that it's amazing that we have this peer network in Indonesia, the question actually was, is this scalable to Southeast Asia? So we all have to kind of listen and read on the side. Thank you both. Erlambang, you're muted. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Just a brief response. Yeah. I think KICA, Indonesian Caucus for Academic Freedom, also start to make a strategic collaboration with student press journalism in Indonesia, and even one particular task force, yeah, in defending together not merely about press freedom but also academic freedom. Second, expanding the network not merely about the law or social sciences, but also in combination with other or cross disciplines. For instance, like those who are working with biomolecular, those who are working with forestry or deep sea and other groups. Actually, this is also a growing interest, yeah, from various parts of the sciences in order to defend scientist freedom or academic freedom. And then it also reflects how actually this issue become more influential to scholars in Indonesia. And our homework is how to connect this with the social movement, of course. Second, how to connect this with the policy reform at the university. And we started by influencing at international advocacy by asking the government to be consistent or coherent in making a policy, especially with the international human rights standards. So we just trying to find, yeah, the way to make an alternative strategy for promoting science and producing knowledge, of course.
Thank you. I think that's great. I think what we've seen yesterday, there was a speaker in the session that I was in that was saying that, you know, academics struggle to speak the layman's language. But I think what we've seen in this session is that everybody that was participating are academics in one form or another, but we are all engaging with the real world and with the NGOs who are on the ground. And so this is fantastic. I think we've just proven that it is possible for some. And you know, as Tamiko mentioned just now, it's great that, you know, to have students involved and to have them up front and center in these movements, either for press freedom or for anti-corruption in various forms. And this is all very encouraging. I understand many of you are really in your preliminary phases of research. So some of the questions that are coming in are quite difficult to answer. Mifachul, are you able to answer whether there's an index on corruption, perception of corruption? You can answer yes, no, don't know.
Okay, yeah.
There's an echo. Maybe you can type it in, yes, no, I don't know. Something we can look forward to in research. He's struggling with that. In the meantime, while he's trying to figure out the echo, Valerie had a number of questions on the future direction of research in Southeast Asia. I think the rest of the questions have been answered. If each of you who are on the panel still can just give a 2-word answer, maximum 3, on where you think the future of research in Southeast Asian area studies is in your view, or perhaps what you are interested in, we can sort of close that. We can close with this because we are over time. So Pan, you are front and center on my screen. Are you there, Pan? Okay, Pan's. Yes. What is your future of research? 2 or 3 words. You're muted, Pan. Click the mute button.
Okay. Human rights, social movement, and environmental sustainability.
Yes, I like all these 3. Very good. Thank you. Tamiko?
Transnational justice.
Oh, good. Yeah, transnational justice. Excellent. Herlambang, the future of Southeast Asian research.
Trying to resolve the rise of authoritarianism still.
Yes, also human rights issue and corruption. Thank you very much, Herlambang. Mifachul, do you have the okay? Oh, because of the echo, yes. So Mifachul's the future of Southeast Asian research is the effect of the human rights frame to social movements. Valerie, you're the one who asked the question. What do you think?
Amplifying regional identity.
Yes. So these are wonderful things. Thank you very much, everybody. And Mifachul has answered. There's one measurement was perceived. So I think there's lots of scope for further research. You've seen an excellent selection today on how we can co-create knowledge, whether it is, participatory because we are part of the movement, or, involving our students, or if you are students and involving your friends. I think it's a very positive look towards the future. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Thank you, AlterSEA, for organizing this and inviting me. It's been great. We did it without any hacking. Well done. And we'll see you. The next session starts in 6 minutes. So go grab a drink and come back in. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Serina.
Thank you, AlterSEA. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.